Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Every time I come, there's just more and more and more going on. And it's inspiring because it did happen in Lakewood. And I think all those of you who take part in making sure that Lakewood is safer and safer. So we're going to talk today about trauma-informed mentoring. And the reason that I'm using this approach is because I feel that almost anybody that's going to enter a mentoring relationship has been through some type of trauma. So let's understand it, and let's try to understand how it impacts the mentees. These are the points that I'm going to try to work on with you tonight. We're going to try to increase your knowledge of the definition of trauma and traumatic events and how it impacts people. We're going to understand a little bit about how trauma impacts brain development. We're going to talk about tools for mentoring, some active listening skills, and the difference between empathy and sympathy, and how does that impact you when we're talking about working with mentees, people that you're mentoring. We're going to really spend some time on maintaining healthy boundaries, making sure that you have healthy boundaries with your mentees. And also, we're going to end with understanding the importance of self-care. So it's really a lot, but I think that it's important. Also, I really want this to be practical and to utilize examples that you all have experienced or have come across. So I'm going to tell you that at certain points, I'm going to stop and say, who can give me an example of that? But here's what I'm going to ask you. I want to save all questions to the end, and I'll be very honest with you why. Because if we start going, and then people ask this question from way out here, it's very hard to go from way out there to come back and to stick with a program, right? And then what ends up happening is people walk out very disappointed because you don't get the full picture, because you're taken all over the place. So I want you to help me be real, but I want you to stay with me, okay? So that's the commitment I want from all of you, is when I ask for examples, I want you to give me an example and stay with me, and then at the end, we'll try to open up to questions. So hold your questions, write them down, remember them, but hold those questions. Okay, so I'm going to start off with just an overview of trauma. So let's just look a little bit about what the definition of trauma is. It's the personal experience of interpersonal violence, including sexual abuse, physical abuse, severe neglect, and loss, and or witnessing of violence, terrorism, urban violence, war or combat, motor vehicle accidents, or any disasters. That's what the definition of trauma is. They are events that are shocking, terrifying, and overwhelming to the individual. I'm going to just ask a question. I'm not going to ask you to expand on it, but how many people, just stop and take a mindful moment to yourself, how many people would say that you have experienced a trauma in your life? Just raise your hand. Yeah. So hold on to that, because it may help you empathize a little bit better. It might help you kind of understand how trauma impacts. Also, it may help you understand healing and how people get over trauma. It results in feelings of horror, fear, and helplessness. And trauma occurs when an external threat overwhelms a person's internal and external positive coping resources. So it's important that we all remember that trauma is an external event that overwhelms us and our coping skills. And that's how trauma ends up impacting us. So many people may have heard this before, but there are what they call the 3 E's of trauma, right? The event and circumstance that caused the trauma, The experience, right, an individual's experience of the event determines whether it's traumatic or not, or the level of trauma, and then the effect. The effect of the trauma, including physical, social, emotional consequences, right? That's all the effect. So let's think about it. Let's talk about event being, let's say, a child loses a parent, right? Is that a trauma? It's a trauma, for sure, right? Let's say that we're talking about the experience, and we have little Dovey. Dovey loses his mother at 8 years old, and he has an entire family system around him and relatives around him, and they're helping him and supporting his family, and they put him into therapy, and the family's working together, and they get him a mentor, and this system is really working, and Dad remarries a few years later, and it's a really positive relationship with the stepmother. Then think about on your own, what would be the impact of that trauma on Dovey, okay? Now hold that for a minute, and I want you to think about Ellie. Ellie's mother died when he was 7 years old. Here, I'm gonna take a client of mine, a young lady. I'm gonna call her Shayna. Shayna lost her mother when she was 3, right? She had 9 siblings ahead of her and infant twins beneath her, right? At 3, nobody in the family felt there was any need to talk to a 3-year-old about what happened. She literally has memories of watching everything happen with no conversation to her. There was no discussion to her about the loss. And as she got older, everybody talked about what the older kids needed because they had lost their mother, right? They needed therapy, they needed care, they needed to talk to them about what was going to happen, they needed to talk to them about the fact that there was going to be a new stepmother. There was a lot of conversation with the older ones, and she can remember watching it, but she was never included. She was never included. And when the stepmother came, the assumption was that she was just going to be enveloped into that as a natural daughter because she was too young to know the difference. Right? So now I want you to go to the effect or the impact. Do you feel that the effect and impact would be different on Shayna than it would on Dovey? Right? Yeah, thank you. So that's what we look at when we're looking at the people we're working with is what was the event? It's not just what was the event. Loss of a parent is traumatic to everybody. But the experience is different with everybody, even in the same family. So what's the event, what's the experience, and what's the effect on the person? And all of that matters when we're talking about trauma, right? Let's talk a little bit about what are the long-term effects of trauma on our clients. Well, when we talk about in terms of their brain development and taking a look at how that impacts them, and I think this makes sense to all of you. Just pay attention to our Shayna and our Dovey and how this will impact them somewhat different. Sense of personal safety. Now I'm going to just give you an example with my Shayna, who I happened to have seen her when she was 15 and 16, when she needed to start talking about her grief. And she went to therapy because she'd never had an avenue to talk about it. In fact, just something that may be helpful is we did art because she didn't have words until she could use words, because nobody had used words with her, right? So any time in Shayna's life that she gets scared of a loss or scared that something's not going to be secure, that trauma comes and overwhelms her again. Right? Her husband is just engaging in a very big business venture and has borrowed a lot of money, and she believes in him, but that fear of her not having stability is overwhelming her. And it's all back to that same trauma. She even gets it herself. She knows it, but it's all back to that same trauma. Ability to trust others. And, you know, their parent deserted them, so to speak, left, abandoned them. And also in traumatic situations, how do people we trust, how have they been with us? How have they related to us, right? So it really impacts their ability to trust others. Their sense of the future. Can they look towards the future? Can they see a future? Right? That's very impacted by their experience of trauma. And I'm sure that all of you who are working with mentees, all of you are seeing that behaviors and social relationships are impacted by trauma. How they relate to other people is impacted by the trauma. Their effectiveness in navigating life changes, right? There are some people who can cope with changes in life rather well, right? You know, okay, we got to switch gears. Now we're going to go do this, and we're going to, our family's going to have to move because Tati got a new job. Okay, we'll figure it out. We can cope with it, right? But someone who's had a very deep trauma involving their own sense of security, that may be very traumatic to have to move, even if it's a positive thing. Even something like moving a child from school to school may bring up a lot of trauma to them. So how do they navigate life changes? And then with younger people that you're working with, their educational performance and their capacity to learn, can they focus? With all they've gone through, can they focus in school? Do they have the ability to focus, right? So those are things that are really important. I know of a situation of a woman who married a man with 5 children. His wife died. And the children, because the woman was dying, she did not focus on school with them. She wanted to enjoy her children. She knew she wasn't doing well. She wanted to enjoy her children, but she never focused on school at all. So when this couple got married, this woman was like, wait a minute, the kids are in school, they're flying all over the place. There's no such thing as homework. There's no such thing as attendance. There's no such, it's like have kairos to the nth, right? And it took like 3 years of work to bring the concept of we go to school because it benefits us, which means attending, it means staying in class, it means learning, it means doing homework, all of that until it's now, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years later, and they're all doing beautifully. But it took a transition. Life changes can be very difficult. Let's talk about why trauma is often overlooked. Because I think that happens so often, which is we see a kid who's not doing well in school, and we're upset at the behavior. That child is not doing well in school, we're going to punish them, we're going to give them homework assignments, we're going to get somebody on it. Or, a woman is not doing well, she's not, she's not functioning in her house, and we're going to figure out what we can do to fix it, that kind of thing, right? But what we need to look at is sometimes there's an underlying trauma, and we overlook it. So some of the behavioral responses of somebody who's experienced a trauma are, they look like delinquent behavior or acting out behaviors, but they're under-identified as responses to trauma. We're not seeing the hurt and the impact of the trauma on them. Stress manifestations is different. It's different how it stresses them and it manifests in them in different ages and stages in their lives. And so people may not pay attention to how it impacts them in their lives. And many people just don't connect symptoms and behaviors that are really connected to trauma. They really focus on what they're seeing today. This is what I'm seeing today, and so we deal with that behavior without looking at the core and the root of what they've gone through. So I'm going to stop and ask, can anybody give me an example of somebody you've worked with that actually has behaviors that people are concerned about, but maybe underneath has trauma? Anybody think of it? Yeah.
Boy who acts out to get the attention of his mother because his mother once sent him away because she thought he was dangerous to the city.
Okay, so a boy is acting out when his mother's around, right? To try to get her attention because she sent him away. She was concerned about his behavior with his siblings and she sent him away. Can you understand that? That a child who was sent away from home needs that mother to make him feel secure that you're not going to send me away again? Right? And how does he do it? Well, wouldn't it be lovely if he just was such a good little boy and so loving and a little teddy bear and all of that? Wouldn't that be lovely? But is that how trauma usually affects the brain? So he's challenging her and saying, will you love me anyway? Or are you going to send me away? Right? So these are situations that you may look at, even adults you may see that maybe have acting out behaviors. You know, I'm going to say that I've worked with women who were very acting out sexually, and some of that had to do with earlier trauma of being molested. And then they went into a marriage or whatever and then started to really act out. But what maybe people aren't aware of, so everybody reacts to the sexual acting out today. But maybe what they're not looking at is what was the core underneath, right? What was the core underneath? So let's talk about what's practical for us, which is what's the underlying question? In terms of the mentee or the person you're working with, what happened to you? What's the personal history that relates to your reaction? Or what's your trauma? Right? That's what you need to be looking at. What's the core? Then it's what are the symptoms? How did you adapt to it? Which might be acting out. It might be being very isolated and not trusting anybody. There are lots of symptoms of how it could be acted out. Who can give me symptoms of how people might act out their trauma? Yes. Unable to accept support, unable to accept validation. ADHD type symptoms, not being able to focus. Yeah. Anxiety. Right. Problems with their Yiddishkeit. Yeah, that's a heavy one. Right? That's a heavy one. Right? Yeah. Holding down a job. Holding down a job. Any stability. Dysfunction at home. Right? All of those could be manifestations of an early trauma. Maybe other things, but it could be manifestations. It's something we should try to understand. But what I want you to understand in terms of this from your angle is that healing can happen in relationships. And the relationship that you have with people that you're mentoring is such an important relationship. And remember that some of these people that have trauma at the core, or other things at the core, when they are acting out, they're really testing you to see if you're going to reject them. Right? I can tell you many years ago, my daughter, she once went to bed and she was in one of those moods, right? She was just like, tantruming, and she was screaming, and she was, pushing me away and all that kind of stuff. And I went to put her to bed and she was like, don't come into this room. I don't want you to come in here and whatever. And I walked away as she was screaming, "Don't come into this room." And the next morning she comes over to me and she goes, "What kind of a mother are you that you walked away when I told you to?" Right? I just want to tell you something. Having children that both parents are therapists, they tell you everything. We get away with nothing. Our kids were just very verbal. So, but that's what she said. "What kind of mother were you that you walked away? I needed you." And it's interesting because she must have been 7 or 8 years old at the time. And I've remembered it since. And it's come back to me with clients. It's come back to me with my children. It's come back to me so many times that when they push us away, that hand that's putting that effort to push is wanting us to hold. It's not wanting us to let go. So we have to be aware of that. So let's talk about trauma and mentoring and talk a little bit about different age ranges or the different ways it affects people. So let's talk about the adolescent brain, how it affects adolescents. And I think this is probably fairly clear, which is that the adolescent brain development plays a huge role in the development of children into stable adults, right? That which the way they process things plays a very big role in terms of how they develop into adults. If they have positive support while growing up, like our Dovey did, had all this support despite the loss of his mother, right? Then they're less likely to take risks and engage in high-risk behaviors. Even if they've experienced a trauma, if they've had tremendous support around them. But if they haven't had the support, especially during crucial times of brain development, that's when those harmful behaviors and those acting out behaviors occur, right? So that's important for us just to be aware of in terms of adolescence. Is anybody in here mentoring an adolescent right now? Okay. So, okay, good. So to those of you who are mentoring an adolescent, can you give me an example of acting out that they're doing that you would think is trying to push you away when they don't really want you to be pushed away? Yeah. Okay, so that's a really hard one sometimes. How many people think that's hard? The child totally shuts down, right? So the child totally shuts down. It's very hard to keep being there when they totally shut down. But do they want you to leave? Right? Do they want you to leave? Anybody else have an example of an adolescent? Yeah. Screaming.
Saying that you're doing the opposite of whatever they want you to do.
Right. Screaming, cursing, saying you're doing the opposite of whatever they want you to do. Yeah, you had an example. So she was cutting, but her mother downplayed it. Now, think about that. Cutting behavior and seeing this on your own skin and feeling that your mother felt like, it's all right, she'll be all right, it's a little bit of cut. So hear that. Hear that. What do you think is happening when someone's cutting? Why do you think they're cutting? Because they're in pain, right? They're cutting because they're in pain. And if mom calls you a drama queen, what does that do to your pain? What's that? Did you hear that? It adds a lot more pain. It adds a lot more pain. So we have to kind of think about that when we're working with people. Okay. Let's talk about adults who experienced early trauma. And what I'm going to do with adults is break this into different areas of their life and how it might impact different areas of their life. So one, I think it would make sense to us is they may have anxiety disorders, depression. They may have PTSD or dissociative disorders. Has anybody ever worked with a child that had a dissociative disorder? You did. Can you tell me what happened? And do you have any idea of what the early childhood trauma was? What? I couldn't hear. Neglect. So this girl had severe, it has to be, neglect, and was dissociative. She couldn't remember what she ate. She couldn't remember what was talked about. She couldn't remember. She was very dissociative. How old was she? 17, right? Yeah.
I had a girl who told me after college trying to shower, she might need it forever because she's associated with showering. I'm like, I could be, you know.
Someone who dissociated in the shower and felt that someone had to come get them out or they just wouldn't come out. I know that there have been certain people who have been dissociative in a bath, and it's really been very dangerous because they slide under the water. So those are things that are important for us to just be aware of, that sometimes mental health issues have a history of traumatic experience that leave very deep emotional scars on them for a long time. There are physical health consequences. And it's something for us to be aware of, the physical health consequences. So you might be talking about people who have a lot of physical health problems in their adulthood. They may have chronic stress, a lot of dysregulation. They might have a lot of autoimmune disorders, gastrointestinal problems. Every food they eat bothers them. Everything, they are always not feeling well. And one thing that I often say, it's difficult sometimes to be in relationships with someone who's always focused on their body all the time and the things that don't feel well. And something I always say is, they really don't feel well. They don't. They really don't feel well. Whether or not there's a medical problem or not, they don't feel well. And although sometimes all of those symptoms keep other people away because people are so tired of hearing about it, think about what they're really wanting. If someone's complaining, I don't feel well, and my head hurts, my stomach hurts, and and I can't go to the bathroom, or I can't leave the bathroom, or whatever it is, are they wanting to push you away? Or what do most people want when they don't feel well? Because they want more care and attention, right? So we have to kind of be aware of that. So there's mental health issues that are impacted by trauma. There's physical health consequences. And I think you all know this. There's attachment and relationship difficulties, right? How does it affect the attachments in their lives? It affects the formation of secure attachments and development of any healthy relationships in their lives. And they struggle with trust, emotional intimacy, and communication due to their post-traumatic experiences. So if they've had painful experiences with other people, right, or the way other people have reacted to their trauma, then it very much impacts their ability to be in a relationship. I'm going to ask you all something. How many have felt that? How many of you feel that in working with people that you're working with? That their history of trauma affects their being able to relate to you as an attachment. Okay, tell me an example. Just not trusting you. Not trusting you to be able to help them. Anybody else? Yeah. Clinginess, all or nothing, you must not like me, you hate me, right, right? Anybody else? Yeah. Yes. How many people can identify with this? Self-sabotage, right? They sabotage the relationship. Yeah. Oh, you're identifying with it, right. Any examples over here? Yeah.
Somebody who wasn't validated by authority was afraid to say his opinion.
Right. And that's something actually that you hear about a lot with more with boys than girls, but you can hear it with girls as well. Boys in yeshiva who have had a Rebbe that has said something to them that really traumatized them, and they really, it really deeply impacts them in the future in their lives. So it really does impact them. Girls also can get that when they're put down, or, you know, the area you sometimes hear that with girls. I know that I worked with somebody for a while, a few years ago, and she, was she on the derech? My older son works in yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael, and he goes, the boys are not off the derech. He doesn't know if they're on, but they're not off. But they're somewhere in there. So she was like somewhere in there. And she kept talking about that. There was so much emphasis when she was in high school on that she wasn't tznius enough. And so many comments about her tznius and how she wasn't tznius enough. And she's like, so I'll never be tznius. So I don't care about it. So I don't, you know, don't get close to me. So don't, and she would say that, right? And she was like, got married, she wore a sheitel, she took off the sheitel. She was like, I have to be my own person. I can't live in the echo of all those voices. So voices, people don't often realize how deeply important those voices are, and the messages that they give kids. And I'm going to say something. A child that can go home and can say, my teacher really sat, she made a big deal over that I wasn't tznius enough and whatever, and a parent who's supportive, and a parent who maybe goes to the teacher and says, could you watch the way you talk to my child? She may be going through a difficult time, but I don't want to push her away. A parent that gives her a forum to talk about it. A parent who says, you know what, at home you can dress like this, and then in school you'll do what they want. A parent who gives her support and love, the child will have a different response than a parent who joins the teacher in putting her down. The support and the love breeds resilience. And the same is true with putting down a yeshiva bacher, right? Let's take a look at cognitive functioning. So trauma can impact cognitive functions such as memory, attention, decision-making, and difficulties in concentration, definitely for boys, difficulties in learning, and any executive functioning. So you see that with a lot of women who are very dysfunctional, right? There's self-esteem and identity issues. Obviously, that should be very obvious, and they struggle with a sense of identity and feeling of shame and guilt and inadequacy. And the reason it's so important for us to be aware of these is, what's our role with these? How can we be aware of them when we're working with people? If we're aware of how much they struggle with their self-esteem, like someone said, they reject validation. We have to find ways that we can validate in ways that they can hear it. So if we were to say to them, but you're so great, you're the best. I've never seen anybody as great as you. You're really the best. And that person doesn't feel that at all, does it speak to them? It doesn't speak to them. It feels like you're working them up. But if you were to say, just very gently, something like, wow, I just wanted to tell you that when all those boys were putting him down and you went over to him and you just said, why don't you come with me? I was really impressed. It was a really nice thing to do to support him when he was being put down. I don't know, that really meant a lot to me. It's a way of saying you did something good without over-validating him. And it's pointing to the specific, because they may be able to hear the specific. I think we all know that substance abuse and risky behaviors, those are maladaptive coping skills to having, to deal with, whether it's trauma or other emotional pain in their lives. Unfortunately, we have so much of that within our community, and definitely those that we have to work with that have emotional regulation challenges. Those are also aspects that are impacted by trauma. There are some or social isolation becomes the issue. They don't want to be with others. They don't want to be rejected. They don't want to be hurt. They may not have social skills, and they may be aware of it. But they don't know how to be in a relationship. And so they alienate. They may literally feel more comfortable just being alone because they're not doing anything to anybody else and no one's doing it to them, right? They have employment and academic challenges. These are people that often have great difficulty in school and may have real difficulty. They're changing jobs all the time, Either they're fired or they lose patience. They themselves can't maintain themselves within that job. And then unfortunately, when they become parents, they have parenting difficulties, right? So the way that they relate to their kids is very impacted by their own unresolved trauma. So I'm just going to kind of finish this section by reminding us that resilience, support systems, and access to appropriate interventions play a really significant role in mitigating these long-term effects. And especially those of you who work with children, the more of that you can model, the more of that you can give them, right? Even when they're trying to push you away, that they know that no matter what, you're there. That these are things that really do help build resilience. And professional help such as therapy and counseling can be instrumental in helping adults heal, helping children heal. But all of these are things that build resilience in the people that we work with. Okay, so that was really looking at adults, all adults who have experienced some type of trauma. I wanted to take a look because my understanding is that many of you working with clients or with mentees who are experiencing mental illness. So how is that maybe different, right? How's that a little different? So mental illness can affect all adults of all ages. It can affect children in different ways as well, but for those of you who are working with adults who are experiencing mental illness, that it can affect adults of all ages and all backgrounds. It's not like, you know, if you're a higher socioeconomic level, you can't have mental illness, or it's, you know, it affects everybody, right? Common mental health disorders can include major depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and the symptoms can range from mild to severe and very much impact their daily living, right? So mental illness is, you know, it is prevalent, and it sounds like many of you are working with people who are experiencing mental illness. What's the prevalence of mental illness? So approximately 1 in 5 adults globally in the world at large experience mental health issues. Stigma and lack of awareness can prevent individuals from seeking help. Now I want to ask you something. How do you think that impacts our world? How does that impact our world? Stigma and lack of awareness. How does that affect our world in terms of even adolescents or kids getting help for what might be mental illness? Anybody have thoughts about it? Yeah. They may be embarrassed, they may be fighting it. Parents also don't want their children to go to a psychiatrist or to get medication or to get help for it because it will impact shidduchim. So they would rather have them. I can tell you that there's this wonderful psychiatrist, Dr. I'm blocking his name right now. It'll come back to me. And he works in Israel, and he works almost solely with seminary girls and yeshiva bachrim. And he talks about how many of these kids have gone with significant mental health related issues that have never been treated because their parents thought they'd never get into the seminary or the yeshiva, and were never treated. Severe anxiety, severe, just all these really OCD, severe OCD, bipolar disorder. Never treated because parents felt that their children couldn't get into seminary or to yeshiva, and that's what he does. That's what he does, yeah. That's what it is, thank you. I appreciate that, because it's been niggling back there. What's his name? I was Harris, thank you. His name is Dr. Shmuel Harris, and he has a lot of published information on it. He actually just co-wrote a book on mental health and halacha, for anybody who's interested. Dr. Shmuel Harris, thank you. It's just, that's an important thing for us to be aware of. Early intervention and treatment can lead to better outcomes, because don't forget, if there's mental illness and it's untreated, then what's their life like that they have a mental illness? What's it like to have OCD and not have treatment because someone might think badly of you if you get treatment? But you're still struggling with it. And it affects your world, it affects you socially, it affects everything, right? And so when we don't treat it, it definitely impacts them. What are the causes and the impact? It really is a result of a combination of genetic, biological, environmental, and psychological factors. I think it's different in everybody, but trauma, stress, substance abuse, and family history do play significant roles. And mental health disorders can impact relationships and work and physical health. It impacts everything in their lives, right? So proper diagnosis by mental health professionals is crucial for treatment. If they are not diagnosed properly and they have a bipolar disorder and they're treated for anxiety, it isn't going to help their bipolar disorder, right? And if all that's done is that we're kind of giving them a pill and telling them to take it without explaining their disorder to them, it's a disservice to them. They can't learn how to manage their own disorders. They can't learn to understand their OCD or their bipolar or whatever, or their anxiety. So it's something that we within us have to continue to work on. But the more support that they get, obviously, the more essential that is for their recovery. So it is prevalent, it is a challenge. Raising awareness and reducing stigma is something we can all be a part of and should all be a part of for our own community and for those in our community who are struggling. Because early intervention is vital. Early intervention makes it easier for all of them. And with the right support and treatment, adults with mental illness can lead very functional lives. Okay. So let's now talk about mentoring. So now that we've gotten hopefully a lot of background and maybe a greater understanding of a lot of the people you might be working with, let's talk about how do we have successful mentoring relationships, okay? So I'm gonna ask you I'm gonna say these and then I'm gonna ask you. So kind of what makes them successful? Well, the key to creating effective mentoring relationship is in the development of trust. It's the development of trust between you and your mentee, no matter how old they are. Whether they're children, whether they're mentally ill adults, whether they're geriatric patients, developing trust is really the key. And that's really, whoever's coming, whoever's there in this position wants to help. And we really have to look at that the most important phase, most important work that we have to do is to work on developing trust, because the rest is built on the trust that we've developed, right? That trust is the foundation of everything else we're going to do. But we also have to realize that it can be a difficult process because there may well be a trauma history and because their trust has been broken in their lives. That's why they need mentors, right? And so they've been let down, they've been disappointed, they've been hurt, they've had expectations, they've been broken, And so we have to really look at how we can maintain ourselves in the relationship and continue to build trust. They need, no matter what they do, to continue to trust that we will be there and be secure in their lives. But I'm going to ask you for a second. I'm going to talk about some of the things that I think effective mentors have to do. But before I do, I'm going to ask you, what do you think an effective mentor needs? What's your experience? Who can tell me something you've done that has positively affected your mentoring relationship? Yes.
Not negating what they said, if I feel the opposite, rather be there with them in their feelings, even if I don't agree with them.
Even if you don't agree with them, don't negate what they say. Who else can tell me? What's something that you've actually done that you think has been a positive in your mentoring experience? Anybody? Yeah. Not being judgmental. It's a big one because they so fear it. They so fear it, right? And remember, they're acting out. They expect you to be judgmental. But they don't want it. They want to know you won't. And sometimes it's hard, right? Because you're responding to the acting out as opposed to what's in the core, right? Yeah.
Building confidence, complimenting them when you see something that they have a weak about.
So building confidence, complimenting when you see something specific, yeah. Just being there. Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. It's really important that when you remember small details of them telling you that they liked something or disliked something, it lets them know you're important enough that I remembered that. You're important enough to me that I remembered that. So if you go out for ice cream and you say, you know what, today we'll get the chocolate, or today we're going to get pralines and cream, or today we'll get whatever, because I remember you like that best. It's just something that says you're special enough to me that I remember that. Yeah. Yes. So we're gonna weigh that with boundaries, but not trying to fit them into your schedule, but seeing how you can flex as well on the schedule so that their schedule is also important to you. Okay? They need those indicators that they're important to you. Yeah.
Stay away from solution focusing, rather like focusing on validating the pain and the needs and whatever. Even though you have like solutions in your head, just be with them in that pain and that confusion.
So important, which is staying away from being solution focused and solving all their problems for them and just being with them. Right? They don't need mostly all of our solutions, right? But they may need us to just be with them and maybe help them think about it. Uh-huh. Not probing a lot with a lot of questions if you see that that's not something they're comfortable with, but giving them space, right? Okay, so let's go through these. Some of them we've already brought up. I didn't need to go through the research. I could have just come in here and asked. Would have been fine. But we're going to talk about some of the things that work, right, with mentees. I'll say something. I was reading through this as I was trying to make sure that it would be actually teaching something, whatever. And as I was reading through it, I thought, so much of this really relates to parenting as well. But don't see yourself as their teacher or their parents or their savior, right? But instead, your role is supporting them in many ways. And I actually was talking when I was working on this to someone who did have a mentor, and one of the things they said is that their mentor, this is what they said is, my mentor thinks she's a superhero, right? She just thinks she's like gonna come in and she's a superhero and she can fix everything and she can make everything so good and she's so great and, I should be so excited about the relationship. And they don't usually want you to be their superhero. They don't want you to replace their parent. It's not your job to be their parent, right? And so it's not your job to be their teacher, right? So our job is to support them in a variety of ways. I'm going to say that it's important that we make a commitment. And that commitment means we have to be consistent and dependable and maintain a steady presence in their life. It is so incredibly important because it says to them, you're that important to me. That if I say, I'll be here every Tuesday at 2, then I will be here every Tuesday at 2. That's important to me. This time and you are important to me. And if you have to change it, that you have a way of showing them importance in terms of why you're changing it, but you discuss it with them so they know they're important and you want to work it out together. But consistency, just think about, with a trauma history, what does it mean to them when you have a lack of consistency? What's the message they get? What? What's the message they get? Yeah, I'm not important, right? So that consistency is important. Understand that the relationship may seem fairly one-sided to you. They may or may not be able to react. It may take time. You may be doing all the work, right? But try to keep that relationship alive. Try to find things that you can do with them that keeps the relationship alive. Involve the mentee in deciding how you're going to spend your time together. And what that means is really try to figure out their interests and try to do things that meet their interest level, whether or not it meets your interest level. Try to do things that meet their interest level. So if what you hear is that a guy likes playing ball, you may go out there and play ball with him because that's what he likes. If what you're feeling is he's having a hard time connecting to you, but he's a kid who loves even things like, going to places like Chuck E. Cheese, where there's all that distraction around, right? All those games, all the, all that noise, all those games. But for a while, if he feels you can be with him and he can do that kind of thing and he feels that you care about him, it might help you develop a rapport with him because he's not forced to speak to you when he's not quite ready. There's distraction. So finding things to do with them that are things they like to do. A lot of girls like the art kinds of things that you may do, or jewelry making. And the beauty is, when you do that, you can also communicate more. It's something that distracts you in one way, but it allows you to talk, even if you start by just talking about colors and what you're doing there. And maybe that's all you talk about that day. But it's relationship building. But try to figure out their interest and to go with that they enjoy or that is at that point more comfortable to them. Try to have fun together if they're open to it, right? So that it's not such a heavy thing every time that we're going to go and we're going to sit down and we're going to talk or whatever, but that you have fun. You want them to look forward to being with you and to seeing you, and that there's some part of the relationship that's lighthearted. So that's important. They may not have that anywhere in their life, a lighthearted, trusting relationship. The other thing in terms of what makes for an effective mentor is use your supervisors. If you're not sure how to get through, If you just feel like you keep going and you're shut out and they can't communicate with you and you're not sure what to do, go to your supervisors, go to peers, and think it through. What else might I try? Sometimes it's just waiting, continuing to be there and be a presence, but use your supervisors, especially when you're struggling with something. Don't be afraid to go to them or feel that my supervisor will think negative of me because I can't break through with this kid, or the kid's still acting out even though I've been seeing him for a year. He may. He well may act out after you've been seeing him for a year. And maybe he'll act out, but talk to you about it. And that may be really good for a year down the line, right? Okay, let me talk about some things that are less effective that mentors might do, but they're less effective. So if they have narrow, specific goals, and the goal is to change the behavior. So I am going to get him to start studying. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to meet with him, and I'm going to start learning with him, and I'm going to start studying for the test with him. I'm going to create a schedule, a homework schedule. I'm going to get all this stuff done so that he is going to do better in school. That's what we're going to do. And you're going to see he's going to be happier ultimately because he's doing better in school. So that's how I can help him. Whose agenda is that? When we're very focused, unless that's his goal that he's asking you to do, if we're very focused on our agenda, don't we all want that for all of them? That they're all going to do great in school, and they're all going to have more friends, they're going to all cope better at home, they're all going to, that's what we want for all of them, right? But we have to look at how we can do that effectively. If they're not consistent, if in essence the mentee cannot depend on them because they're not consistent, that actually has a negative effect on the mentoring relationship. If they're trying to instill values in them, in other words, giving them a lot of hashkafa and a lot of musar, I'm happy to go out with you, but I just wanted to say, really in Lakewood, we don't go out, without stockings and little sandals like that. I think it would be better when we go out that you only put the stockings and sandals on. It's better for your neshama if you do that. It's better for everything, everybody, and you give them all this musar. That's not what they're there for. That's not what they're there for, right? So, maybe, do you think really in truth it'll be easier to be accepted in the community if they don't walk out like that? Yeah, right. But right, but if they are extreme, unless it's something they bring to you that is important for that they want to discuss with you, you can just create comfort with them. Just show them your comfort with you, but don't try and say to them, look, it's 6 hours between meat and milk, and you don't have to go 8 hours. It's not going to help anything, right? Or, if whatever it is, that you wear a turtleneck all summer under your T-shirt because you don't want anybody to see your neck, right? So you don't have to do that, and you don't have to. They're getting enough musar. But for you just to be there and show them a normal, healthy, relaxed you that's not judging what they're doing might help them become more comfortable. But giving them the musar, there's enough people already doing that, right?
Would it be a problem if, for let's say a boy, we're not talking about stance, let's say the boy is doing something very embarrassing for the mentee that he shouldn't be doing the action.
Like what? So you know what I'm going to say? I'm going to ask you guys this. I'm going to turn this to you. You live in Lakewood, New Jersey, right? I live in LA. A mentor in LA could tolerate a kid walking in a bathing suit into a pizza shop. No, not. But I'm just saying, there are others in there who are dressed that way. So I'm saying it doesn't stand out as much. But you live in Lakewood, New Jersey, right? And you have this mentee, and he's wants to go out to pizza with you, right? You've agreed that you were taking him out to pizza today. That was what you were going to do with him, right? And he comes out, and he's wearing a bathing suit, a T-shirt, and sandals, right? So what's your gut feeling? What's your gut feeling? Yeah. Give him ice cream also. Yeah.
If you explain that, I think that means you're not accepting him for the way he is.
If you right, and let me ask you something. Do you think he doesn't know that it's what? He went swimming. He was too lazy to change, right? So maybe he was. Maybe he went swimming and he was too lazy to change and just wanted you to accept him as he was. But maybe he went swimming, was too lazy to change, and wanted to see, were you going to reject him? Because I think that he's testing and testing the community. I'm going to just give you an example. We had on our block, we have a family, very, very yeshivish family. All the boys, except for one, went to Riverdale, the whole Riverdale type family and whatever, right? This one that didn't go to Riverdale really didn't go to Riverdale, okay? So he struggled. And I want to tell you something that to me is so interesting. He's married now. He married a good from girl. They have a beautiful home. Is he typical yeshivish? No. Is he an incredible part of the community and a baldstaka and a really good person? He is. And I'm going to tell you something his parents said. We live on a block, and in LA we don't have the developments and things like that. We don't have developments. But we happen to live on a block that's a very friendly, friend-oriented block, where people are really there for each other. People, give gifts to each other when someone has a simcha. People reach out. People are there for each other. It just happens to be that that's very much our block. His parents say that they believe with all their heart that that son is from because of the love he got from the block. That when he would walk out with purple shorts and a flowered shirt, and I would go, I'm going to change the name. Ellie, how does the flowered shirt like that match with the purple shorts? I don't get it. But where does the matching go? I mean, I could do the purple shorts, I could do the shirt, but you gotta get a little coordination in there, that kind of thing. But he got that from everybody. When one time he went and there used to be a kosher coffee bean in our neighborhood, and he went into the coffee bean, and a girl who lived down the block the whole time was in there, and he went over and he said, good morning, and how are you, and what are you ordering? And someone from the community went over and said, it really isn't appropriate to be speaking to a Rebbe's daughter. And he thought, I've known her since I was 1. We live on the same block. I said good morning and asked what she ordered. Do I really need to be disciplined? Do I really need to be put down for that? Right? But on the block, when he was walking around at 12 o'clock, and I would open the door, not just me, I'm not talking about me, it's everybody, and say, Dovey, I'm cooking, it's Thursday night, come sit with me. Come sit. And he would sit and schmooze in a kitchen, or he would whatever. He was loved no matter what he wore, and believe you me, he wore. He had some very interesting tastes in clothes. He got himself into trouble. He did all of that. He did. But he knew we loved him. He knew he had a place. And he had a lot to work through. But I think that it's interesting. In our world, we can't get through clothing. Clothing is a major issue in our world, is getting through the issue of clothing. Yeah. It's an interesting thing. Are we condoning the behavior, right? Are we condoning? Yeah.
These kids know good and well what we believe when they see us. They know good and well. I find that only if something's universally wrong, like stealing, then I'll say no. And then that Scooter going back to Westgate, we're not taking Scooter's phone with us. I don't allow Scooters to be stolen when I'm around. So that's not different than a bathing suit. A bathing suit is not universal. It works in LA, but it doesn't here.
Right. So the issue is if they're doing something really against the law or something that's, then you may have to say, you know what, that's something I'm not okay with. But I think we do have to look at, I mean, they know our standards, they know our values, they do know. And we have to look at, are they trying to challenge us because they fear rejection? And are we really going to be there with them? And or is it something deeper than that? And I think
Like at some
we're going to, yeah, yes. Like if they're doing anything
we gotta
dangerous,
accept them at a certain point. Is there, like, okay.
if, yeah, yes, yeah. So it's not about, right, so if he's using, or if he's shoplifting, it's not that you say, wow, that's really great, I'm so glad you're shoplifting, that was a great tie. You know, you wouldn't say that. You could say, shoplifting concerns me. It's okay to say that, but do you reject him for shoplifting? He needs to know you're still there, even if you're letting him know that that's concerning. Or I'm worried about that. Why do you think I might be worried about that? Meaning what? So the issue is that you need to let them know that you're worried about it for them. Not you're worried about it because we don't do that in our community. So the issue is the shoplifting worries me. Not I'm going to give you mussar for shoplifting and it's against halacha and whatever and the law and if you get arrested and all of that. I mean, it may be that he will allow you to have a discussion about what could be the consequences of, like if he were to say to you, well, what are you worried about? You know, I got 3 good ties off of this. What are you worried about? And you were to say, I'll tell you what I'm worried about. I'm worried about how it might impact you in your life. I'd be worried about arrest. I'd be worried about stealing. That has a negative impact. I'd be worried about how you feel about yourself. So what you're doing is not judging or giving mussar or telling them what to do, but you're going back to them. It's about you. I don't want bad for you. Right? So that's what you might want to take a look at. If the other last thing is if you just focus on behavior and you're not focused on the person, that's also what I would call less effective mentoring tools. So let's talk about some of the positive ones, and we have talked about some, but active listening, I'm going to actually go to this a little bit. I'm going to actually not read through the slide. I'm going to ask you guys, you tell me. I'm sure you've all heard about and talked about it before. How would you know that you're actively listening? What are active listening skills? Yes.
Reflecting on what they said, like basically repeating back in other words.
Mirroring.
Understand.
Yeah, mirror them, kind of say back to them so that they know you heard them. What else is active listening? Yeah. What? Not imposing your ideas. Yeah. Yeah. Eye contact is really important. I'm going to just say something. I loved your question about what if they're shoplifting or what, because that's a real question. right? But look at the difference if I were to say, you know, I'm worried about that shoplifting. You could, it's against the law, you could go to jail, you could, you know, just lots of things can happen if you do that, and it's really bad stuff. It's really bad for you, and it's really bad. So what am I going to tell you? I just really think that shoplifting's a big issue, okay? What if instead of that, I said, it really worries me. It worries me because I worry about how you might feel about yourself. It worries me because there could be negative consequences to it for you. So I'm here, and I want to hear no matter what you say. I'll be here. But I want you to know that it worries me. Do you think they would receive that differently? But look at the difference that eye contact and voice modulation make in active listening. Right? I'm so clearly not judging you. I'm not judging you on it. I'm just letting you know that it worries me. For you. Right? And that softness in the way you say it and the maintaining eye contact is important. Even if they reject you, even if they don't get that you think it was a lot of fun and that it was just a game, I just did it this time, sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't, whatever. You just show your care and concern. But you're not the one who's going to give them musser on it, that kind of thing, right? What else would you say is important in terms of active listening? Anybody else? Yeah. Show interest. So especially if you're dealing with people who have a hard time talking or communicating, anything they tell you, show interest in. You might even bring it back in another way. Do a little research on it and bring it back. But show interest in what they're saying. And someone said before, remember it. Right? Anything else anybody can think of? Yeah. Right. So if you're not sure what they said or what they meant, then ask another question. Can you tell me what you meant about that? I'm not sure I understood. Right? It's important to me to understand. Right? So you want to ask questions. Yeah. And I'm going to just say that's more important than it sounds, which is make sure you're really focused on them. Because we are too busy. We are very, very busy. Right? We are very, very busy. We don't focus well anymore. Between the phone and between, everything in our lives and whatever, we don't focus, right? I'll give you an example, a personal example. I had an hour and a half with my grandchildren tonight in one family, an hour and a half. And I was sitting there thinking about this presentation. Should I switch this slide? Should I do this? Should I do that? It was in my head, and I'm like, take out your computer and check it. No, you only have this amount of time with your grandchildren. I am going to tell you I was totally distracted. I acted like I was in the room, I was playing, I was doing all those things, but I will tell you I was not fully focused. Now, they're very little, did they get it? I hope not, but they may well have. But someone who needs us, when we are not fully focused, they will get it. And one of the things I would really say, because they need it so much, and because they pick it up in us, is take a mindful minute before you start. Put other things out of your mind and just walk in to be with them. Yeah, did you want to say something?
I see very effective also that if your phone does ring in the middle of speaking, you just, even though they say, yeah, it's fine, you can pick it up. No, I'm not going to pick it up now. I'm sitting with you. I'm listening to you. I think that makes a big difference.
That was really important. Did you hear that? So your phone is buzzing, right? You have it on vibrate instead of ring or whatever. And they hear it and they go, no, you can pick it up, right? It's okay. And what he said is, and if you say to them, no, 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 this is my time with you, I don't want to pick it up. Look at what that means. Look at what that means to them. And probably look at how often do you think they get that in their lives, right? A couple days ago, I gave a talk to a group, and one of the things we talked about was intimacy. And I said I wanted to actually talk about something. It was a group of women, but I'll ask it in this audience as well. I said, how many people would honestly say, if you're really honest, that telephones have impacted intimacy? Telephones have impacted intimacy and relationships at home with spouses. How many women have said, or men have said, forget it, they're on the phone. She's on her phone, forget it, I'm not going to bring it up. How many people are distracted by it? How many people, does it cause problems in the relationship? How much does the phone impact our lives and our warmth and our relationships? So doing what we can to empty this space just for them is really critical. Okay. Let me just see something. In 30, go say, okay. Okay, so I'm going to kind of go through these quickly. We talked about active listening. We talked about a safe and non-judgmental environment, personalized support, really working on personalizing it, being there for them in a way that they need to. I was talking about this talk with somebody, and she gave me an example that was really interesting in terms of the concept of non-judgmental environment and all of that. She said that her oldest daughter has Down syndrome, right? And somebody asked if she could send her daughter to their house to play, right? So her daughter with Down syndrome was 5 or 6 years old and went to somebody's house. The other person had a psychologist come to the house, do an assessment of her daughter, send the assessment to her mother, and her mother-in-law. Now, besides the malpractice involved in that psychologist having done that, she was so betrayed. Like, what did you do? What were you doing, right? And so what we have to look at is kind of what's our role. We have to be it's not our job to figure all these things out, but we got to just stay within our roles, right? And offer personalized support. One thing I also want to say is that, especially for people who are working with people who have mental illness, sometimes what's so important for them is to feel that they can comfortably talk about it. That they can talk about it and it's okay. And they don't have to worry about talking about it. If they talk about it to their parents, even if they're married and whatever, the parents are worried. What's happening? Is she going back? Is her OCD coming back? Is her bipolar disorder active? Everybody's so worried that they feel they can't talk about it, right? I have a client in my private practice who has bipolar disorder, and it's a difficult one. It's very difficult. She's a young woman. She's a wonderful woman. She's highly effective in her life. And recently, she had to learn to speak up to her husband and say, I am having normal reactions to normal disappointments, and that is not bipolar. But sometimes we need to support that. We need to allow them to talk about that. Right? That's not bipolar. Right? And we have to help and to allow them that ability. Education and awareness, educate ourselves. We educated ourselves a lot about trauma today, but about whatever the mental illness is, whatever the issue is, whatever they're struggling with, get yourself more information about it. This is really important, which is a strength-based approach. Really look at them for what their strengths are. I guarantee you they all have strengths, no matter how they hide them, right? But figure out what their strengths are and try to work with it. Try to work with those strengths. Try to emphasize those strengths. Find your ways to do that. Help them break down any goals they want in terms of goal setting. It's not about your goals. So really help them decide, and help them decide how they want to come up with overcoming some of the challenges. If there's support networks, especially for people with mental illness, others who are bipolar, others who, any of the AA groups, any of the, self-help groups, any groups within the community, speak to Hannah Esther Schechter, she'll tell you about all the groups available. Help connect them. It may be an incredible support with them to be with others who are struggling with the same thing. And it may bring them out socially. It's so much that it can provide for them. So know what that is. Know when at times you can have advocacy. Can you advocate for them in different ways? Know when it's appropriate. And celebrate milestones with them, whether it's birthdays or whether it's things they've accomplished that the two of you have been working towards. So try to celebrate that together. Okay. I want to talk about the difference between sympathy and empathy, because what we need to do is to bring empathy into a relationship. So my hope is this is going to work. If not, I'm going to turn you to the back of the room.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here. And you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Leave it to Brene Brown to just say things, and I think it's really important. I'm going to go rather quickly now, but it's really important to think about the difference between empathy and sympathy when we're with, especially when you're with people that you are mentors for, to really think about that difference. I want to talk for a minute. I want to be able to go into boundaries before we end and self-care, and I went too slow. It's really important to take a look at boundaries and how they help keep relationships safe for you and for the client. And both of you, everybody can benefit from effective boundaries. So in terms of boundaries, all kids need boundaries. I think adults need boundaries as well, but especially kids who've come from like chaotic and unpredictable environments, they've been victims of abuse, or they've had to take care of the adults in their lives. So the boundaries are actually helpful to them when we create boundaries. But things to help set boundaries with a new mentee is really take a look, and with all your mentees, just be really clear. What is my purpose in mentoring this person? What is your role? What does that mean I'm their mentee? What am I supposed to be doing? What do I need to know about my mentee? What do they need to know about me? And are there any barriers to me being an effective mentor with this mentee? And if so, either what can I do to overcome them, or should I not be mentoring this one? And I'm going to say that this first section needs to be done with your supervisor before you begin. You need to know your role very clearly. What is my role, and do I feel that I can do it? Right? Do I feel that I can do it? And then it's important for you to set boundaries. So in conversation with your mentee, you're going to talk about when, where, and how often you're going to meet. Yes, there's going to be some flexibility to that, a little bit of flexibility, but they have to know about how often you're going to meet. If you're scheduled to meet once a week and you start coming to meet 3 times a week, there are no boundaries there, right? So you have to be the one to set healthy boundaries. It teaches them how to be in life, right? How to have healthy relationships. The goals and the dynamics of a successful mentoring relationship, you're going to have to pay attention to that, how to have that relationship. But it's really all that I'm saying here is you have to be very clear about your goals and your roles with your mentee, with the person that you're with, when you're with them. You have to be clear about physical boundaries. How physically close can I be to this person? And are they someone that I need to not be physically close with? What's appropriate, what isn't? And some of this you may need to speak to your supervisor about. I would say, are women supposed to hug girls? Are you supposed to hug or you're not? You speak to your supervisors and develop that. But one thing I'm going to say is, if someone is uncomfortable with touch, that's a boundary. You need to respect that. But be aware of healthy space in between you. Time boundaries. If you're supposed to be with them for an hour, are you with them for 2.5? Or are you with them for half an hour or 3/4 of an hour? The time boundaries are important as well. Conversational boundaries, right? If you're there to talk about them and to help them, and the conversation ends up about your workday and your children, and they're telling you how they did in school, and you say, really, my son learned that Gemara, he did great. He loved it. It really wasn't so difficult, right? That's about you. You need to be there to be about them. Your personal life in most situations, you have to really, really be careful with. When I talk about self-disclosure with mentees, I say it's judicious use of self-disclosure. What is the purpose of my self-disclosing? Is what I'm self-disclosing teaching them something or giving them something, or am I just talking about me? Right? Sometimes having a disclosure about interests can help promote a conversation. Really, you like football? I never really liked football much, but I was great at basketball. I was. No, but that's, you can have conversations like that. That's disclosing what my interests are, but it promotes relationship. But it's not telling them, well, I had 4 brothers and, if they needed a basketball team, I had to be the 5th. So, I'm not going into all the details with them, but I might share that I did like basketball or whatever that might be. So it's judicious. What am I teaching or giving? What's my purpose in what I'm sharing? Your relationship has to be a mentor-mentee relationship, a healthy relationship. And you have to have personal boundaries in terms of your own life and them not taking over in your life. I was called recently about somebody who he decided that he was going to be a mentee for a yeshiva boy, and the yeshiva boy was not doing so well in the yeshiva, and his parents were going to move him. And this guy invited him over every week and would have him over at his meal every Shabbos and invite him for Shalosh Shodas, and then would walk him, if he was going to his friends, he would walk him to the friends. And the parents were calling and getting more and more concerned about the role of this person in his life, and I was like, you're the parents. If this is not feeling like a healthy relationship, and the more they talked about it, the more it didn't, they are the parents. They need to stop that relationship. But even if he was trying to be a mentor, he way overstepped his boundaries, right? So we have to look at a healthier relationship. I'm going to just go that signs that you need to set boundaries. If you're feeling annoyed when they place demands on your time, if you're feeling like they're just taking too much of your time, if you have trouble sleeping because your mind is whirling about this relationship, you can't stop because there's just too much going on with it, if you feel burned out, if your own personal relationships are suffering, and if you feel like you're being pulled in a million directions, then you've got to look at the boundaries. Is this a healthy relationship? And, am I clear about my role? Am I utilizing the skills and the protocol required? Am I filling my personal need, or am I filling my personal need to be liked and to be the superstar? So am I doing what I need to be doing, or do I want to have a superstar role here? And am I teaching the relationship? Am I teaching my mentee healthy relationship skills? And what's most important is if at any point you have questions or you aren't sure, go to your supervisors. You don't have to do this alone. Go to your supervisors. They're there to help guide you. And the last thing I want to say is take care of yourselves, especially when you have difficult mentee situations. But you really have to take care of yourselves. I'm going to just show you that this hand, and one of the things that when I was reading about this picture of this hand is that if I were to try to pick up this computer, I'd have a very difficult time without a thumb, right? If I were to try to pour myself some water, I really wouldn't be able to do it, right? If I were to try to do the laundry and two things that I need to do in my life without my thumb, I really couldn't do it. When we overgive of ourselves and we don't take care of us, our thumb is missing. And our lives need all of us. We need to be able to work with a full hand. And so we really have to watch our own boundaries, but we also have to really focus on self-care. And so what I'm going to say is, these are kind of typical things. Yoga, a lot of people are getting into yoga now, and I think that for those who do yoga, yoga's you do, right, huh? And you've done it, and does it impact you? Yoga can really, that kind of thing, if there's meditation or tefillah that has that, I'm going to say mindfulness and grounding techniques, I find them incredible. I need to say I do it, I'd say many times during the day, I'm like, whoa, slow down. Slow down, you're moving too fast. Just slow down here a minute. It just takes a moment. It just takes a moment. Friendship. Friendship is really important. I think men are often less good at that than women, but that's maybe a bit of a stereotype, but I think often that may be true. But friendship with people who are your equals, your friends, people who you can let down with, people who you can laugh with. Humor is wonderful release, right? It's a wonderful release. Real friendships that you can be real people, that you don't have to put up a front. You don't have to meet anybody else's needs. You can just be you with that person, right? Value those friendships and allow yourself those friendships and times that you can just be you. Sports or exercise, if you like art, if you like music, those are things. Journaling, massage, that does it for me. Cooking for some, that's something that could be. It doesn't matter, but I am going to say that before you leave, you should each really take, everybody, you too guys, a mindful moment to say, what could I do to better give to me and better take care of me? Because you really need it. Otherwise, you walk through life like this. And it may not be anything on this list. This is just a list. We all do different things. But what can I do to better take care of me? And that's it.